Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar session. I'm very excited to dive into the content with our speakers today, but before we get started, just a very quick bit of housekeeping. Hopefully you're able to hear my voice and see the slides that are being shared right now. If that is not true, or if it changes as we go through today's presentation, please add feedback in the chat section of the GoToWebinar menu, and I will do my best to help troubleshoot in the comments there. Additionally, we are going to hold some time at the end of the session for any questions that you may have. So I would encourage you as we go through today's session, add any questions that you have in the questions section of your GoToWebinar menu. We may not be able to answer them in the course of today's session, but at the end of the session, we will be holding time to go through everything. Without further ado, I'm very excited to get our speakers introduced. And towards that end, I would love to introduce Ayan. Ayan, how are you doing today?
Hi, Zoe. I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. So what are we talking about today?
So today's going to be a very, very special Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, Cybersecurity and Emerging Technology Working Group session. This is going to be a two-part series on how to become a conference speaker. Just a little bit of background about WCAPS. It is a professional development organization with a mission to advance the leadership and professional development of women of color in the field of international peace, security, and conflict transformation. And what's really nice is that there are multiple opportunities to participate, to engage, and one of which is through the multiple working groups that we have. And today, the Cybersecurity and Emerging Technologies Working Group utilizes a number of platforms and leverages its membership to identify, amplify, and augment work being done to explore the effects of emerging technology and cybersecurity concerns on communities of color, to promote the engagement of communities of color in the national and international discourse on relevant issues, and explore and equip communities of color to enter the workforce of the future. So what's really important with today's session, and I'm going to share and punt it over to Camille, who is our chair of the Cybersecurity and Emerging Technologies Working Group, is the importance of having a diverse voice in the national security and cybersecurity space. And what a better way of doing that in having and ensuring that we have diverse representation in the conference speaking circuit. So without further ado, I'd like to open it up to Camille. Camille?
Thank you, Ayan. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending a part of your afternoon or morning if you're on the West Coast with us. I'm really excited to introduce Wendy Nather, our speaker for today. She has graciously offered to share her expertise with all of us. When WCAPS's Cyber Emerging Tech Working Group started, we were really keen on not only making room for women of color in this space, but also highlighting how issues uniquely affect women of color in these discrete communities. And who better to speak to that than you all on this call? And so we want to make sure that we equip you to not only do that at work every day, as you're speaking to your colleagues and looking at issues of the day, but also as you speak on stage. And we want to make sure your talks are getting picked and that you understand what the folks are looking for, and no better person to kind of shed light on that than Wendy Nather. She is the Director of Advisory CISOs at Duo Security, part of Cisco, and a consummate speaker, a advocate, just a wonderful person. And when we met up at Black Hat, we had a discussion about the importance of seeing women of color on stage, and she emphatically and quickly stepped up and offered to share her knowledge with everyone. So I will turn this over to Wendy. I want to say a big thank you to her and a big thank you to Ayan for planning this, and Zoe as well. So enjoy.
Thank you so much, Camille. Hi, everybody. As she said, I'm Wendy Nather, and I would like to share with everybody sort of the behind the scenes information that can help you when you are writing a speaking proposal. And we'll just get right into it here. So why are we doing this? Really because we need new faces and voices on the stage. We can always use more, and to be honest, I have been speaking in public for like 25 years and I'm really tired of it. So I need other people to step up and take this over. Because really, the more perspectives we have, the more we learn. First of all, let's go over what a CFP is, because it's not always completely obvious when you see an announcement online somewhere, especially when you see it on Twitter. It could either mean a call for papers, like academic papers, or it could be a call for proposals for a talk. And make sure you know which it is, because if it is a call for papers in an academic setting, they're going to have a lot more requirements. First of all, you have to produce a paper, and there has to be academic rigor around that paper, references, citations, and so on. A lot more that's involved with it. I'm not going to go into that type of CFP today. I'm just going to focus on proposals for talks. But just a reminder to check when you are looking at a CFP call, make sure you know which one it is. So this is kind of the top level outline of how it's supposed to work. You know, they say what they're looking for in talks for the conference. You send it in by the deadline. A program committee reviews it, and then you receive an acceptance or a rejection. That's the high level view. But in reality, it can be a lot more complicated than that. So behind the scenes, there might not be only a CFP, there might be sponsored speaking slots. So a company, a vendor might pay to be included. So they might either get a speaking slot for them to give a talk, or they might pay to be part of a panel. The program committee also looks at what has been submitted via the CFP, but then they may look at what else they might need that hasn't been submitted, and they might reach out to invite specific speakers. And this is why it is very important to do your networking, to get to know people who organize conferences, because when they are thinking about, we want somebody to talk about blockchain, who do we know who speaks about blockchain, who's a really good speaker? You want them to think of you. So that's why networking is just as important as just sending in a CFP. In fact, I might even go so far as to say that just sending in a response to a CFP is kind of like just sending in a resume cold when you're applying for a job. It always helps a lot more if you know the people who are doing the selecting, because there are a lot of other factors that can go into selection. Usually the keynotes are invited, but they might also be sponsored, which is why you see at some conferences a whole bunch of keynotes, one after another on several days. You might see opening keynotes and closing keynotes. There's a little bit of keynote inflation going on these days, if you ask me, because what they want to do is hold talks in a general session where everybody attends and then break out into tracks. So as they may sell sponsored slots, or they're inviting several people to speak and they want to feature them all equally, you might see a number of keynotes. And then at some types of conferences, they may also have fire talks, which are deals where they have a segment of time and people can sign up on a sign-up sheet to give a talk. And either people vote on the talks that they want to see, or just whoever signs up gets accepted. And you might speak for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. And there's usually a combination of all of these things going on. Now, before I go on, just a reminder that if you have questions as I go along, please feel free to put them into the questions chat window, in the questions window in your little console thing there, or you can put them in the chat window, and we'll be monitoring both of those. Now, you probably want to know how these submissions are chosen. Here's what they really, really want. Here's my Spice Girls reference here. What they really, really want is they want good content from good presenters. So they have to figure out whether the content that you're proposing is going to be good, and they want to know whether you are a good presenter, which is really hard to figure out from just a short written abstract. The other thing that they want are, usually they want unique talks, but they don't have to be completely unique. If a conference CFP is asking you whether you've given this talk before anywhere, it's actually okay to say yes. It won't automatically disqualify you. What they want to make sure is that these talks haven't been done to death at all the other conferences. They don't want attendees coming up and going, man, I already saw this 5 times at 5 other conferences. Why are you doing this again? So it doesn't have to be completely unique, but it does help if you say, yes, I gave this talk before, but I've updated it, or here's the last time that I gave it, but only this one time. And of course, they want it on topics that interest their target audience. What they do not want, what they absolutely do not want, is a sales pitch. So you might see some talks at conferences on the expo floor where there is a vendor who is talking about their product. And that's great because it's planned that way. Usually the vendors pay for the booth space, they can say whatever they want. But when it comes to a CFP, especially in the InfoSec space, they do not want anything that looks like you're going to be trying to pitch your company or your product. So what you should not be doing is don't let your marketing or your PR department submit a talk on your behalf, because they tend to have the marketing reflex where they want to put in all the big adjectives about how wonderful it's going to be and how important this is. And the program committee can see immediately that this looks like a pitch and they probably won't accept it. Don't mention your own products. So you definitely don't want to say, we are going to talk all about how to do multi-factor authentication with Duo. That is not what they want to see. Also, don't try to sneak past the program committee by trying to pair up with a customer, because they're on to you. If you are a person associated with a vendor and you are bringing a practitioner on stage with you, chances are they're going to figure out that it's a customer, and the point of it is for the customer to say nice things about your product, and they will not accept your submission. So please don't do that either. I see submissions where a vendor submits and there's a great topic with the with the practitioner, and the program committee says, well, this is really great, we want to hear from that practitioner, we don't know why the vendor's involved with this. So this is what you should not be submitting. I put this in Comic Sans so that you could see just how ridiculous it looks. Do not call yourself an industry visionary, believe me. And you don't want to say you're featured in all sorts of things, and don't say how many years of experience you have. And don't make it about scary threats, because by the time you finish reading this abstract, first of all, you don't want to go see the talk, right? You're already rolling your eyes. I can hear you rolling your eyes out there in the audience. And also, by the time you get to the end, you're probably saying, I bet she sells cyber steak knives. And it's true, I do sell intelligent cyber steak knives. So this is not the sort of thing that you want to be submitting. Don't put it in your bio either. Just put the facts in your bio. I worked at this and this and this place. I have done this. I have given these talks before. I have submitted these other written these papers, I've written these books. That's fine. Just stick to the facts. You don't have to sell yourself as a commodity. And in fact, it's better if you don't. Your work will speak for itself. So in other words, don't be a rock star. Just don't. See that nobody wants to see this. I don't even want to see this. Now, let's talk for a minute about blind reviews. Shouldn't the program committee be reviewing submissions without looking at the names and the genders and the affiliations of the people who are submitting. Yes, in an ideal world, they should be doing that. And in fact, even if the software that the program committee uses to review things doesn't allow you to do a blind review, I know a lot of program committee people who try to do a blind review in the first pass. And that's what I do. I try to look only at the actual submission itself and decide entirely based on the content whether this is something I want to see. Now, this can also backfire because I know some very, very good speakers who unfortunately kind of phone in their submissions. They don't write very good submissions. So I will read the content and go, oh no, I don't want to see this. And then later when I go back for the next pass and I look at the people, I go, oh, this person's a really good speaker. Why did they do such a lousy job on their submission? This is very sad. So if you are a well-known speaker, do not assume that just because it's you submitting that people are going to accept it. Assume that there's going to be a blind review of your content and that nobody knows who you are, and make sure that it's as good as you can possibly do it. Now, having said that, the other thing that the program committee needs to do is figure out whether the submitter actually knows what they're talking about. And that's why the content of the submission is so important. That's why the details are important. Because if you write a very vague submission, they can't tell. You know, they will say, yes, multi-factor authentication is very interesting and important, but does this person even know anything about it? And they also need to be able to uncover conflicts of interest. So if you see a submission that says, you know, we you know, definitely do not need, I don't know, we do not need machine learning. Machine learning is all a scam, it's fake. Immediately we will go look at the submitter and go, well, why are they saying this? Are they trying to, you know, beat down a competitor? Are they trying to sell something that's an alternative to machine learning? So these are all the reasons why it can't be a completely blind review, but in an ideal world, everything would start out that way. So what do you need to do? First of all, if you want to submit to a conference, look at the past talks from previous years to see what kinds of topics they prefer, what kind of tone they use, and what kind of technical depth that they prefer. The interesting thing about the cybersecurity industry is there are so many different sort of mini cultures inside. There are defenders, there are attackers, there's defense, there are industry verticals where, you know, they have a lot of topics there that are very specific to them. So you really need to understand where you're submitting and what they're looking for. The other important thing is to proofread your work, and better yet, get someone else to check it with you. One of the best ways to proofread your own work is to read it aloud to somebody else, because you will often notice mistakes or typos that you wouldn't have noticed if you were just reading it silently to yourself. And you would think that I wouldn't have to say this, but please spell the name of the conference correctly. ShmooCon has this problem all the time. And a lot of the people reviewing the submissions say, if you can't even be bothered to get our name right, why should we accept you? And then follow all the CFP instructions. Please follow all of them. There are reasons why they have it. For example, there are conferences like RSA where they ask for 3 different abstracts. One is going to be the very, very short thing that they put in one type of schedule listing that's going to be very short. And then they have a slightly longer abstract that is going to be in the printed materials that describes the talk. And then they have they ask for the very detailed abstract, the outline of what you're going to say that is not going to be shown anywhere, but this is for the conference committee to look at what you're really going to be saying. And if you copy and paste the same 3 lines into all 3 of those fields, you know, you're going to get rejected. So please follow all the CFP instructions. There are reasons why they ask for what they do. The first thing you really need to do to get the conference committee interested is to pick an interesting title. Now, don't be too clever. It's got to be something that everybody's going to understand, but try to make it as interesting as you can, because this is what's going to grab their attention. And it's also what is going to convince people to look further at your talk to decide whether to go attend it if you get accepted. So I asked on Twitter for people to recommend some of the titles they really liked in previous talks. And first of all, these are the ones I like the best, but it was really interesting to see how many people recommended their own talks. I still haven't figured that out. But here are some of the cool ones, like the "You Are Elephant in the Room." I kind of like that one. So I became a domain controller. You immediately want to go see what this is about. And that's how I lost my eye. That sounds kind of gruesome, but it also kind of grabs you. And you can see that this was for DEF CON. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's very important, again, to understand the tone of the talks for the conference that you're submitting to. Some of them are very academic, some are very professional, some of them are very free-for-all, like DEF CON. So there are some titles you can get away with there and some you can't. And then finally, this one, which I love, the Talkie Horror Picture Show, is kind of a meta talk here. You should look up the recording for this one, because it's about overcoming your fears of submitting to a CFP. So if you didn't like this webinar and you want more information and better information, go listen to Kat, because she also gives a great talk on this. If I could give one piece of advice for people who are submitting to a conference, it's to say what you're going to say, not what you're going to talk about. So look at this topic here. You should not be saying, I'm going to just talk about wide area zebra transforms. Now, before you wonder about what this is, I looked this up. This is a term I made up. There is no Google hit on it at all. If you look it up in quotes, there are no hits on it. I made it up. It doesn't exist. But when you are submitting on something like this, people are first going to go, well, what is this? And again, if you don't say what the details are, people can't even tell whether you are an expert at wide area zebra transforms. Even if they don't know what it is, they will be able to tell from the content whether it sounds like you know what you're talking about, whether you put in any detail or not. So say what you're going to say. Don't be afraid of spoilers. Don't be afraid of listing what you're actually going to reveal in the talk, because that's how people decide whether they accept your talk or whether they go to see your talk. So I made all of this stuff up, varying binary patterns, terabyte-sized screensavers, I don't know, for really big screens. I don't know what I was thinking. It was early in the morning. But you can see that you're going to be seeing live demos. So some people will go, oh, that's cool, I want to see a live demo. Release my open source code. They can tell that you spent a lot of time thinking about this and working on this. So this may be an indicator that you really know what you're talking about. And upcoming circus legislation, I don't know. Again, I made this up, but feel free to use the term if you like. So you may wonder about some sponsored talks that turned out to be really bad or very controversial or both. And the reason why you might see talks like that is because they don't always vet the talks that sponsors put in. I wish they would, and it looks like they're going to be doing more of this in the future. I know Black Hat is going to, but sometimes sponsors will submit talks that are not very good, and if the program committee doesn't check them and vet them and push back on them, then they may not be something that you want to see. But if you are submitting on your own, this is the level of detail that people want to see. So if you say in your abstract that you're going to give 5 principles on wide area zebra transforms, say what those principles are, because it's only then that reading it, you can tell whether these are going to be any good, or whether they're going to be incredibly obvious, like zebras have stripes. Then you would say, no, we really don't want this talk. At least try to outline the whole talk. Especially if you're proposing a training, you need to put in time estimates so that they can tell whether you've worked your way through this material before and whether you really know how long it's going to take. Because I will look at training proposals and go, this is a very complex area and they're only proposing to spend 10 minutes on it. Are they not going to have any discussion on it? Are they just going to be lecturing? So within the character length restrictions that they have in the CFP, try to outline your talk. And feel free to link to previous versions of it or to other talks that you've given, because again, they really want to know what kind of detail you're going to go into. Now, do I even have to say this? Don't make dirty jokes in your abstract, in the title, unless you are very, very sure that this is the kind of conference that is going to welcome it. Again, DEF CON, you know, they're pretty bad, naughty people, knock yourself out. But if you are submitting to another place that you're not familiar with, this is the fastest way I can think of to get your talk rejected. It's not that we are all prudes. It's not that we don't like sex. It's that this has nothing to do with the professionalism of the conference we are trying to put on. So yes, we're happy you know about sex. Good for you. Can we just drop this and get back to talking about cybersecurity? Thank you. Now, here's a question that always comes up whenever the CFPs open for Black Hat and for RSA in particular. Why do they open the CFP so early, and why does it take so long to get our acceptances? And I'm going to give you kind of a view into the backstage, what happens at these sorts of conferences. So what you see on the outside is often that the CFP starts, the CFP closes, sometimes they give you a couple of extra weeks, and they announce that at the last minute. But here's what happens backstage after all of that. The program chairs have to read all of the submissions. For RSA, I think this year it was something like 2,500 submissions. That is a lot of submissions for two people to have to read. And remember, this is not, you know, their full-time job. Often this is just something they are doing, you know, because they're a volunteer, or, you know, maybe it's part of their job, but not all of it. They have to read 2,500 submissions and do them justice, because if you put in your submission, you want them to take it seriously and take their time reading it. So that takes a really long time. And especially at RSA, they don't necessarily decide on the tracks beforehand. They pick tracks based on what people submit, and then they kind of group them into tracks. They go, this looks like an identity and access management track. We have enough material for this, so let's sort this into a track. Then the submissions are assigned to groups of people. Not everybody doesn't read all 2,500 submissions, although I suppose they could if they really wanted to. Usually they're assigned by tracks, and you get assigned as a track chair. So you have to read and review and rate all of the submissions. I think for the track that I am doing for RSA, there's something like 180 submissions. There are usually 2 or 3 times that many for some of the very popular tracks. And again, these are usually very busy people who have day jobs, and they have to be able to get some time to read these, to discuss them, to argue about them. Sometimes they will look at them and go, this is a really great talk, or it would be if we could just change it this way. So sometimes we will go back to the submitter and say, you know, we like this idea, but we would like you to spend more time on this part of the topic, if you would be willing to do that. So if we send it back to them and they amend it and they resubmit it, then we have to re-review it. We have to argue about the selections. We have to say we think this belongs in a different track and it doesn't really go in this track. All of this takes time. And again, you want us to make sure that we are taking our time with this. And usually for RSA, they take one day and lock us in a room and don't let us out until we make our track selections. Now, getting dozens of people to fly in for this one day, again, is a huge production. So this is why it takes so long. After we make the selections, the speakers are notified and they're scheduled for their tracks on their days, at their times. And this also has to do with how many people we think are going to show up for the talk. So that depends on how large a room we assign. And, you know, I feel very sorry for the people who have to do this on the back end. And in some of the cases, for some of these conferences, including RSA, the speakers then have to submit the slide decks for review a couple of months beforehand. So we have to give those speakers time to create their slide decks. They have to submit them. We look at them to say, wait, this isn't what you said you were going to talk about in your abstract. Or, ooh, we see a product pitch in there. Please take it back out again. So we review the slide decks. We send them back to the speakers. They have to revise. They resubmit them. Again, this is all taking time. This is taking a couple of months. In some cases, like for the Enigma conference, because these are very, very short talks, they're like 20 minutes in length. We also, for each of the sessions, we do rehearsals, a set of 3 rehearsals in video conference with the speakers to make sure that they can hit their marks and get the talk in at the right amount of time. So again, planning rehearsals and getting everybody to, you know, be able to get on a hangout and rehearse their talk, that takes a couple of months. And then there are last minute substitutions. Somebody can't make their talk after all. We have to put in an alternate and we have to give them time to build their slide deck and everything. So this is why it can take 6 to 8 months from the start of a CFP all the way to the conference. And yes, this is why it's very hard to submit late breaking research if you have to plan this far ahead. But this is also why some conferences like RSA have a special track just for late breaking research. And I think they open it up like maybe a month ahead of time or 2 months ahead of time. So yes, we realize that sometimes it's hard to plan ahead, but because of the logistics of something this big, that's why it takes this long. Now, don't forget to put your questions into the chat window if you want to complain about this. Now, let's say that you get rejected and you want to know why. It's absolutely okay to ask for feedback. In fact, I encourage you to, because it's the organizer's job to give you feedback in a tactful and constructive way. Of course, if you did not spell the name of the conference right, I think they're perfectly justified in pointing that out. But it might simply be that your submission was 1 of 20 on the same topic, or 1 of 40, or 1 of 80, and they could only pick 2. So it wasn't that yours was a bad submission, it's just that maybe we liked the particular spin that somebody else did on that topic. Now, if you are worried about submitting, you haven't submitted before, here are some of the things you might be thinking to yourself, like, gosh, there are so many smart people out there. There is nothing new under the sun that I can possibly think of to talk about. Don't worry about it, because how you say it might be new. People love new perspectives and stories, especially if you lived through something, if you did something yourself. That is one of the most valuable kinds of talks that we look for. We don't always want to see talks from a vendor or a consultant who says, this is how you should be doing this. We really want to hear from practitioners who say, this is how I did this. Another one is that I'm not technical enough. And this really ticks me off, because there's a lot of gatekeeping in our industry where people think if you are not breaking stuff, if you're not hacking into something, then you shouldn't be on the stage. And that's absolutely not true. Not everybody wants to watch code on a screen. I usually don't. It's very rare. I like to hear really good stories and really interesting ideas. Even if you're not really sure you've thought everything through yet, it's perfectly okay to get up on the stage and say, you know, this is the idea I'm playing with. What do you think? Because if it's really interesting, the discussion is what everybody wants to see, both during the talk and after the talk. So please don't be afraid of not being somebody else's idea of technical enough. There is plenty of room on the stage for everybody at many different kinds of conferences. And then finally, you have a great idea, but you're afraid that you're going to get stage fright. That's okay. Some of us have been doing this for many, many years, and we still get nervous right before we go on stage. There is help and coaching for that. In fact, if you go and submit to what they call the rookie tracks at Security B-Sides conferences, these are for first-time speakers specifically. And you are paired with a mentor who can help you build your talk, help you practice it, be there to cheer for you when you give your talk in front of a very friendly room. So there are ways to break into speaking if you haven't done it before, where you don't have to worry that people are going to be shooting at you from the audience. And remember, if this is the first time you've done this, I mean, this is the first time I'm giving this talk on how to submit talks. So just say to yourself what I say to myself. Of course, I don't know what I'm doing. It's called learning, and it's a good thing. Everybody should try this. If you're willing to get up there and share what you know and continue learning with everybody else, you are going to be a lauded and respected speaker, no matter what you're talking about. So can you do it? Yes. One of our managers at Cisco, Trey Boynton, says, yes, you can do this. So I wish you the best of luck, and I'm going to open things up now for questions. So who's going to be reading questions to me? Is it going to be Ayan? Is it going to be Zoe? I'm not sure who's doing the Q&A.
So far, it looks like folks haven't added any in the question section of the menu. Just as a reminder for folks, if you have any questions, you can add those in there. And Ayan, you want to ask any that we get that come in?
Absolutely, and I'm happy to kick off because I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. For example, Wendy, you've mentioned about the differences in talks, but really curious to know, are panels better than talks, and should I submit a panel?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. What we find, especially where people rate the talks, this is why it's so important to give your feedback on talks, because the organizers look at what worked and what didn't. And I can tell you that in a lot of cases, especially at RSA, people don't always rate panels very highly. Now, you might think that it will get you a better chance of being accepted if you don't submit all by yourself, that if you kind of hide among other people, like a panel with some other practice speakers or something, but that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes a panel can be very good if you have people who you've specifically selected because they have different opinions and they're not afraid to, get down and dirty with them and discuss and yell at each other on stage and things like that. But if you just have a panel of people who are all agreeing with each other and saying, oh yes, when I was doing this, attendees don't tend to like it as much. So creating a panel takes a special set of skills. And so I would recommend, especially if this is your first time, go ahead and just submit on your own, because chances are it will be better accepted than a panel.
Thanks, Wendy. That's really, really good to know. So let's say I'm interested in submitting a talk, but it requires or potentially could benefit from having a secondary speaker, like a co-speaker. From a strategic standpoint, does it up my chances if I pick a well-known co-speaker for submission, or does it really not matter?
Yes and no, because if I look at a submission and I see two speakers and I know one of them and I don't know the other one, usually I prefer to get newer faces on the stage, but somebody might look at it and go, well, why isn't this well-known speaker just doing it by themselves? I know they're a good speaker. Why do they have a co-speaker? So you kind of wonder whether they're just bringing the other person along, kind of as a as a pity talk. You don't want to give that impression. So in the submission, you should probably describe why you have two speakers, like so-and-so has done this in the public sector and so-and-so has done this in the private sector. And during the talk, they're going to compare and contrast their their sets of experiences. Then you can go, oh, I know why they're doing those together. And then it's great, especially if you've practiced together. it's very important to rehearse together if you are co-speakers instead of just kind of passing the clicker back and forth. I know some speakers who are so professional that they can just get up on stage at the last minute and flow back and forth really well together. But in general, again, if you are new to public speaking, it's better to do it on your own. And please don't be afraid that just because you're not known, it doesn't mean you're not going to be accepted.
Gotcha. That's good to know. And just a friendly reminder, if anyone's interested in submitting questions, that they can submit it in the chat box, and happy to repeat it in the call here for Wendy to respond. But to continue the Q&A session, I am curious. So let's say I have the confidence, all right? I'm now ready to just submit a talk, but I'm not 100% sure between two concepts that I'm interested in. One is a subject that I'm really, really passionate about, and another one is like a talk that I'm okay on, but it relates to my professional background. But I'm more interested in submitting the talk that I'm more passionate about and it's outside of my lane of experience. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I'm going to go with the meme girl and say, why not both? I mean, there's nothing that says you can't submit more than one talk. Now, having said that, sometimes we see people who are kind of doing A/B testing on their talks. They're submitting the same talk, except they're doing it with different titles. And we look through, you know, all of their submissions and go, why are they doing this? But if you have two very different talks in mind, you often don't know whether one or both of them are going to be accepted, especially if you do a really good job on both of the abstracts. I would encourage you to talk about what you're passionate about. If you are not really passionate about the other one, but you feel you need to do it because it's what you're known for, if you can't get excited about it, I wouldn't encourage you to submit it, because the lack of enthusiasm may not come through in the abstract, but it might come through in the talk. So if you can't find a way to get excited about it, do what does excite you.
Thank you. And we have a question. It's from Camille. How important are witty titles? And how do you come up with yours?
How important are witty titles? You know, there can be an abuse of puns in titles. A lot of people think that, or you know, if I had a nickel for every time I saw something like Fear and Loathing in City of the Conference, or How I Learned to you know, How I Learned to Love something or other. Some of the titles, the witty titles, are overdone. So at the very least, if you were doing a very technical or academic paper, you want to have as much detail in the title as you can so that people know why they're going to be interested in it. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be a funny title or a witty title if it's an interesting title. That's about all I can say. How I come up with stuff, I know a lot of really funny, smart people, and sometimes I'll just workshop titles with them, either on Slack or on Twitter, or, you know, in a conference room or something, and you know, just pull things out. Sometimes I will just pull something out of my head in the middle of the night, and it'll seem like a good idea. You know, do whatever works for you.
And we have another question. Do you have any venues that you suggest for people starting out?
Yes, I mean, definitely if there is a security B-sides near you that has a rookie track, like B-sides San Francisco, B-sides Las Vegas, B-sides London, there are probably some other ones that I don't know about. They have specific rookie tracks for that. But the other thing that you can do is, if there is a conference that you want to speak at, and you know somebody who's already given a talk there, just reach out to them as a mentor while you're creating your submission and say, I haven't done this before. What advice can you give me, and can you coach me through this? And you know, don't be afraid to tackle whatever you can. Just bear in mind, again, that some of the really large conferences, even if you do a very good job on the submission, the numbers are just against your being able to get in, just because there are so many submissions. So I would, recommend picking a venue that is maybe smaller than the big time ones to start with.
Gotcha. And then another follow-up question we have is, how do you prepare and get your nerves out before speaking?
There's if you follow Duarte, D-U-A-R-T-E, the Duarte Twitter account, they just tweeted out something the other day, a blog post about their kind of pre-talk rituals, and every speaker has a different one, and they had a really good one. I retweeted it, a good set of suggestions based on what kind of speaker you are. If you are very, very nervous and you need to calm down, that's one thing. If you are tired and jet lagged and you need to get your energy up before you go on stage, you might have a different set of rituals that you do. You might jump up and down and walk around and, breathe deeply and do jumping jacks or whatever. It depends on what you need, either to slow yourself down or speed yourself up. That's about all I can recommend. Sometimes, just getting a hug from somebody who is going to be in the audience, that helps a lot too.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, because one of the tricks I remember hearing one time was like, imagine people in their underwear, but that's also a hard thing to do.
Oh dear God, no, don't do that.
But going back to getting ready to submit for a talk, what resources are there or that you could recommend on finding call for proposal, call for presentations?
Oh, I know that there are groups out there that and websites that collect CFPs, and I don't know if Zoe, do you happen to remember some of those names? I don't off the top of my head.
No, I don't. I would have to double check.
Yeah, I think if you Google for InfoSec conference CFPs or something like that, I know that there are websites out there, but I do not remember them, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Fine.
See, I just failed.
No, just have to ask just in case, because there are plenty of resources out there, and sometimes it just could be as simple as Google, but didn't know like maybe if there's like a specific or targeted sort of resource that you're aware of. But then also just curious, so is there ever a point in time like where, not for those starting out, but maybe for those who've like gone through and experienced like multiple submissions, at what point is there ever a point in time where you say, I just give up and stop trying to submit talks?
Yeah, sometimes I've for example, I've never had a talk accepted at Black Hat, and I just thought, I'm giving so many talks other places, I'm just not going to bother anymore. But it really depends on how badly you want to be accepted at that particular conference, and you have to ask yourself why you want to be accepted there. Do you just want to put it on your resume? Are there other communities that would be better served by the knowledge that you have? And, ask yourself why you want to speak and why you want to share what you have. And if it's really about, if it's really about the audience, giving them information that they need, then you can think more about where else you're going to go and where else you're going to keep trying, rather than simply saying, oh, I really want this badge, I want this feather in my cap.
Gotcha. Good to know. Okay, so I'm going to look back. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, this is Camille, and I wanted to throw out a recommendation for a place to find CFPs.
Yay.
CFP Land is one that you can subscribe to, and they'll send you a weekly blast with a bunch of CFPs. And then I think there's another one. When I find it, I will.
Can you say it again? Because it sounded a little blurry on my end. What was it?
CFP land.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And then also if you sign up for Diversify Tech, it will have a few CFPs at the bottom of the weekly email blast as well. So CFP land and Diversify Tech.
Great, thank you. All right, well, if that's it, I will let you all take us home and talk about the next step in this series.
Yes, Wendy, thank you so much for your presentation, tips, tricks, and advice of how to submit a successful talk that is beneficial to all of us. And also the other awesome thing is that this webinar has been recorded, so we could watch it again for future reference, and as well as for those who are unable to join us today. But if you are not a current WCAPS member, please join us at www.wcaps.org for more information and get a little bit more understanding of all the different resources, events. And this won't be the last time that we'll also be following up with Wendy. We look forward to having her again for a part 2, and this will follow up on once your talk has been accepted, how do you then prepare for the conference? How do you then get ready for the session itself? So we look forward to having her early in the year, and that event will likely be in person. So please stay in touch with our listserv, our emails, and keep a lookout for all the information that we'll be providing. And before I close it out, Camille, did you have anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you all for joining us. In addition to the webinars, we have some programming coming up on the West Coast and in New York. So definitely check us out, join the listserv, find out more events and more opportunities to engage. But enjoy the rest of your day.